Production of Real Ag is made possible in part by an underwriting grant from
the Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by farmers.
Kansas Farmers Union, working to protect and enhance the economic interests and quality of life for family farmers, ranchers, and our rural communities. Learn more about our mission of education, cooperation, and legislative advocacy at kansasfarmersunion.org.
I never worry about going to the market and there not being food there, and I never really worry about like turning my tap and not having water. And so, my hope is just like we be maybe, like I said before, a little more proactive and try to deal with these things before it gets to the point where we might have to worry about like whether there's water going to come out of the tap.
You are what you eat. It's a tired old saying. We probably heard one of our grandparents say it. But it's true. Our entire body is made out of the things we consume. So, what are we eating? And beyond that, where is it coming from? What's the history? What are the consequences of what we consume? Not just for our bodies, but for our minds. And beyond that, the planet. Because what we often forget is what we eat impacts the world around us. Our air, our water, our soil, our society. Every choice on our plates impacts the world around us in more ways than we often think. Agriculture is not just about growing crops and raising animals. It's about the environment we live in, the economy we rely on, and the future we create. So, let's dive a little deeper, shall we? This is Real Ag.
Hi everybody. Today I want to talk about something that most of you already know. It's hot outside. It's really hot. And if this feels worse than normal, that's because it is. We just found out that July was the warmest month on record. Warmer than any other month since we began keeping track more than a century ago. On top of all this heat, we're also experiencing one of the worst droughts in over 50 years. Almost a quarter of the continental United States is facing what we call extreme or exceptional drought, with states like Nebraska, Kansas, Missouri, Oklahoma, and Arkansas getting hit harder than most.
Anyone else remember this guy? That's right. 11 years ago, this message went out about how temperatures were rising, we had the hottest July on record, and drought was getting pretty bad. Fast forward 11 years, we just had the new hottest July ever. Drought has become even more of a concern. And guess what?
That's bad news for a lot of people.
Yep, that's right, Obama. Now, in the grand scheme of our daily concerns, how water and agriculture work often takes a back seat to more immediate issues that require our attention. Our rent, our bills, kids, family. The point being is we rarely think about the gallons of water that are going into the food on our plates. And water use in agriculture has become almost an invisible thing in our collective consciousness. And as this climate change roller coaster throws a bunch of challenges our way, it's clear that we all need to understand water use a little bit more. Because water shortages are no longer just a distant threat, they're something that we're going to have to deal with. So now we're all strapped in for this climate roller coaster. Let's focus on drought. As temperatures rise and water supply dwindles, the challenges of drought become even more important. But what is the big deal about drought?
So recent droughts, such as the ongoing drought in California or in the Southwest, or even historical droughts such as the Dust Bowl in the 1930s, these are naturally occurring droughts that typically last several years or sometimes almost a decade. In our projections, what we're seeing is that with climate change, many of these types of droughts will likely last for 20, 30, sometimes even 40 years, even exceeding the duration of the long-term intense mega droughts that characterize the really arid time period known as the medieval climate anomaly.
Boy, this guy seems to know a ton about drought. Wish we could talk to him.
And like what I always tell people, right, is it like climate change doesn't mean that like the West is going to turn into this kind of like Mad Max kind of like wasteland. But, what it fundamentally means is that we can't keep doing all the same things, all the same ways, and get the same results.
That's right, we got him. Meet Benjamin Cook, one of the world's best climate scientists who works at the NASA Goddard Institute for Space Studies. Benjamin's work has been focusing on unraveling the complexities surrounding drought patterns and their impacts. He's also going to explain to you this fun fact which you will carry with you for the rest of your lives.
One of the ways that we kind of, learn about droughts is from tree rings. And so, we can basically, trees kind of put on a year or one ring of growth every single year. And when there's, particularly in the Western US, when there's wet conditions, they put on a wide ring. And when there's dry conditions, they put on a narrow ring. And so what we can do is we can basically measure those rings and we can translate that into information on things like soil moisture or precipitation.
How about that, huh? And that's not all. Tree rings can actually tell us a lot.
And so from those tree rings, we know that there were droughts in the past, some of which were, seemed comparable to some of the most recent really bad droughts. But the one difference we're seeing right now is that now these droughts are happening in a world with climate change, a world that's warmer because of human activities. And as a consequence, the same droughts that happened in the past are now happening in a much warmer world. And those warmer temperatures can amplify the droughts themselves. So basically kind of increase evaporation and dry out the soils more than you would expect from precipitation changes alone. But at the same time, just like water stress will stress out vegetation, crops and trees and things like that, then having higher temperatures on top of that is an added stress because again, just like trees need a certain amount, plants need a certain amount of water, they also need a certain kind of temperature range to kind of grow optimally. And so what we're seeing is that, these latest droughts, coupled with these really warm temperatures are leading to, bigger impacts on ecosystems and in some cases crops.
That's pretty remarkable. You can just tell how much moisture a full year had by looking at tree rings. That's incredible.
Yeah, in some places it's easier to do than others, but because the Western US is so water limited, so dry, it means the trees are really sensitive to drought, and so we can develop some really good what we call reconstructions of soil moisture or precipitation.
So which human activities further exacerbate water-related challenges?
Yeah, so there's a couple kind of levels here. So there's kind of indirectly there's climate change, right? We're burning fossil fuels, we're increasing greenhouse gases, especially carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. That's warming the world and that's affecting hydroclimate, in various ways all around the world. More directly, a lot of the challenges are the fact that, particularly in Western North America, is that we're just using a lot of water, especially for agriculture, right? So, agriculture in the Western US accounts for, about 70 to 80% of total human water use. And so, when we read these articles about renegotiations of, like Colorado River kind of water allocations, kind of impacts, on people across the region. A lot of it is driven by the fact that we need so much water for agriculture in that particular region.
There is no simple cure for drought. The answer is not in conquering nature. Nature helps only those who help themselves. Patiently, eternally, man starts over and over again. Water is there, only deeper down, harder to reach.
One, I think, kind of good way to think about, at least broadly, kind of climate change and water is that kind of a warmer world basically kind of supercharges the hydrologic cycle, right? And so, the places that are already kind of dry, like Western North America, are going to tend to get, drier. Whereas places that are already a little wet, like, I live here in New York City in the eastern United States, which is pretty wet, we're not really concerned about climate change and drought in this region. What we're much more concerned about is climate change and heavy rainfall and flooding.
No longer satisfied with flash floods, the gang is planning bigger and wetter floods. Junior's getting dangerous. He's getting tougher and bolder every day. Now he's tough gangster. Heading for the big time.
We've kind of gone over how climate change does influence drought patterns. It influences the intensity as well, correct?
Yeah, I mean, and that's the kind of clear signal we see, right? Which is that is climate change, seems to affect the intensity of drought. So, what we see in most places where climate change seems to be having an impact, right, is you get a drought beginning through precipitation deficits that are, in most cases, mostly just through natural variations of the climate system. Okay, so, a drought that would happen anyway, even in a world without climate change. But because those droughts are happening in a warmer world, right? When they do happen, you have higher temperatures, you have basically a thirstier atmosphere, which means the atmosphere wants to suck more moisture out of the surface. And because of that, the same precipitation deficits can mean more severe like soil moisture deficits. Right, so you're kind of like, you have less water coming into the soil moisture bucket and you have more water leaving, which just leaves kind of overall even drier soils compared to a world that's colder without climate change. And, in some cases, this impact can be pretty significant, right? So we've done work on the Western mega drought and our conclusion is that about 30 to 40% of the severity or intensity of that drought was because of climate change. And so in that case, climate change didn't cause the drought, but climate change, turned what was a, moderately severe drought into one of the worst events of the last 1,200 years.
So with that in mind, what are the projections for future droughts?
Yeah, I mean, and, all of the kind of trends that we're seeing, the events that are happening now are very in line with the projections, which tell us that the kind of, warmer it gets, the bigger the impacts across the climate system, but including droughts become, right? So, a warmer world means that the kind of severity and risk of, some of the worst droughts that we've seen over the last, couple decades in the Western North America are going to increase quite substantially.
Are we talking like 100 years, 200 years, sooner?
By the end of the 21st century, right? And it's hard to kind of like, to be clear, it's like, it's hard to predict, the next couple decades or so, right? We can't really do that. But what we can really do is, really what climate change does is kind of load the dice, right? It doesn't guarantee a result, but it makes certain results more likely. Okay. And so, for example, like in our analysis, if you look to this mega drought period that recently ended, we hope, our projections say that, by the end of the 21st century, if kind of warming continues, there's about a 50% chance of a similar or worse event happening. In the past, it's less than 1%.
We're going to be an interesting tree ring to analyze one day.
Yeah, I think so.
In the drought country, entire towns go dry, except for one single well. Life revolves around that well. Water is doled out, counted by the bucket. As though it were milk or food, water becomes a commodity. It takes on new value. People claim it, haul it, treasure it. There is a new delivery man in these towns, the water carrier. He goes from door to door, distributing the water.
I think climate change is less abstract than it used to be compared to 10 years ago. I think people are much more kind of aware of it, but it's still a kind of a long-term kind of chronic problem, right? Like it's less a heart attack and more like diabetes. It's not a problem where like if you don't do something right now, then the consequences are immediate, right? It's this kind of chronic thing that requires this kind of long-term kind of commitment. And I think because of that, like, it's just not, and understandably to a certain extent, like, it's not forefront in a lot of people's mind. At the end of the day, climate change as a problem is not pass fail, right? It's not like we go over 2 degrees and the world ends, or we stay under 2 degrees and everything is roses and we don't have to worry about anything, right? Like, it's this kind of continued kind of gradient. So at the end of the day, like, what it comes down to is any warming that we can avoid is warming that we don't have to adapt to. So, for example, thanks to Paris Agreement, some of the worst case scenarios for the end of the 21st century are probably off the table. And if we can kind of pull back even more, then that's even some more benefits. But the fact that we've already are very likely to hopefully avoid, or we're on track to avoid the worst case scenarios that we thought were much more plausible 10 years ago is certainly kind of very encouraging. And there's still some more action that can be done there. And then there's the kind of use side, which is like, okay, like, how do we use this water? Like, how do we value it? What is the best way for us to, think about it and still kind of thrive in a warmer world? And that's a challenge, but it's not necessarily insurmountable.
In the drought area, there exists a double need for nursery schools. With little water and devastating heat, disease becomes a menace. WPA nurses are vigilant in their search for typhoid and other germs resulting from water shortage. Temperatures must be checked. Throats and eyes, irritated by wind and dust, require experienced attention.
Climate change isn't only causing drought, though. The warming planet has been leading to melting ice and glaciers, contributing to the rise in sea levels. And that could affect our water as well.
So what are the potential consequences of rising sea levels on coastal freshwater sources?
Yeah, I mean, so this is a big issue, and this is something we're already seeing quite a bit in many of these areas. And there's really kind of, basically what's happening is, you're getting rising sea levels, and, we're seeing kind of 2 big impacts. One is ecological, and one is maybe a little bit more relevant for people. But from an ecological perspective, we're starting to see these the salt water kind of intrude into coastal areas and start to significantly affect the vegetation. So there's parts of here in the eastern US where we're starting to get what are called ghost forests. So places where, because of sea level rise, have kind of pushed salt water into these marshes and swamps. It's basically killing the plants and the trees there that were living in the brackish water, because the salt water that's intruding is kind of too salty. The other kind of impact is potentially intrusion into coastal aquifers. And this can be particularly a problem in places where there's been a lot of pumping of water out of the aquifers. So there's creating this kind of, for lack of a better word, vacuum. And with these kind of sea level rise, you're starting to see kind of water, seawater kind of seep into these aquifers. And this is a problem because then they can become almost unusable, because you're pumping water out of these aquifers. You're doing it because it's fresh enough that you can use it for municipal or agricultural needs. But if these aquifers become saline, then it's kind of game over. Like, there's nothing you can really do to desalinate an aquifer.
The fundamental structure of the government's work relief program in the Great Plains is construction of dams. Rain will fall, and when it falls, it must be saved.
So now we've chatted a bit about how climate change affects water availability, so let's transition to discussing how this directly impacts agriculture.
So how long have you been in this field?
Since about 1984.
Wow. So in that time, what have you seen change with water use in agriculture?
Not enough.
Meet David Molden, a visionary leader in the realm of water management. With a background in hydrology and water resources, David has dedicated his entire life to addressing the critical challenges surrounding water sustainability. David is an absolute giant in this field, and I really wanted to get his perspective on a few things.
Maybe it's me who's been in the field so long, but it's always frustrating how little things change, how slow things progress, right? So, and I think that is not because we're not giving the right tools or information. I think it's rather that the attitudes, the policies, the politics of water are difficult. You know, you're really getting into some hot water, so to speak, when you're entering that area. People are reluctant to touch that. It's not a vote winner to say, hey, you got to curb water use in agriculture.
Dams are underway throughout the entire drought region. In some places, a dam every 100 miles. In other places, a dam every 10 miles. But never aimlessly, never by chance. Water must be diverted to old waterways and empty basins. We have farmed and we have fought the drought with haphazard methods too long.
What else? We have this other dynamic is growing cities with more demand for water. And then kind of that a growing, keeping agriculture sustained, keeping the agriculture base there that also demands more water. So who's going to win in that battle between cities and agriculture and environment, right?
That's right. Water shortages create kind of a showdown between cities and agriculture. And population growth adds another layer to this. As more people inhabit urban areas, the demand for water for those people increases. But the demand to feed a growing population also increases, making farmers want water for crops.
And the mistake is to say, oh, farmers waste water. They don't. It's us consumers who are really driving water use. And give as much attention to their needs and systems to support better use in agriculture. That can free up some water. And then look at the consumer side. What do we do as consumers? I was working a lot with Swedes, and they really made an effort to kind of even stamp, okay, this t-shirt takes so much water, even have a mark on this beef that you're eating takes this much water to consume, actually marking the products.
I think that's actually a fantastic idea.
So let's all pretend that we're Swedish and go over how much water certain things take. It's time to play How Much Water Does It Take to Make? This needs a better title, but this is surprising. Let's start off with one cotton t-shirt. How much water, you think? Well, it might surprise you to know it's around 650 gallons of water to produce. A pair of socks? Less, right? Well, yeah, but it's still quite a bit at around 100 gallons of water. Underwear? That takes quite a bit of water as well. In fact, around 300 gallons of water. Finally, one pair of jeans. After all the cotton and manufacturing is taken into account, about 2,000 gallons to produce. That's right, you might be wearing 3,000 gallons worth of clothing right now, and that's not even taking into account shoes, which can also take thousands of gallons of water to produce. A good reminder that water use in agriculture doesn't just affect food, but every aspect of our lives.
When nearby wells fail, farmers haul water from distant places for animals and household needs. The homesteaders settled and fenced and plowed this farm. This is not old land. One generation pioneered to tame it. Their sons and daughters, with the same gallant courage, are struggling to conquer and develop this land.
So, the reason I put in all of these old pieces is to remind us we've been navigating this web of water's role in agriculture for a long time now. And we probably haven't made as much progress as we could have. And in the face of climate change, reimagining our relationship with water becomes even more urgent. And being aware of the water we use to produce the things around us becomes something we really need to learn about.
If you could tell everyone on Earth one thing about water use, what would it be?
Every day, be conscious about how much water that you use as an individual, including in your food.
That's right. Just like socks take less water to make than jeans, some foods take a lot less water to produce than others. And as we're on the precipice of this warmer world that might be more water limited, every little bit is going to help.
I think what it is at the end of the day is there's not going to be any silver bullet solution. And, I think it's not going to be one solution that can work kind of everywhere. I mean, I think any ideas, anything that can basically kind of help and contribute and is feasible in these kind of different areas, should be part of the portfolio.
And as we've been doing all season here, I asked our experts this question.
Describe the future of water use and agriculture in 3 words.
I want to do 4. Painful unless we change.
Probably forced increased efficiency. Inevitable. Like we're inevitable, increased efficiency, because we're going to have to be more efficient. Because in most areas, I think we're like I said before, we're not going to have the same amount of water to do all the things that we have been doing in the past.
I was trying to find the right words to put a nice bow on this piece, but thankfully, our friends back in 1937 did a way better job than I could now.
Water is a prime necessity without which the West and the nation cannot prosper. Rain for the earth. Rain must fall. It must be treasured. We must save it and teach our children to save it, so that the plainsmen of tomorrow may claim their just heritage.
That's bad news for a lot of people.
Production of Real Ag is made possible in part by an underwriting grant from
the Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by farmers.
Kansas Farmers Union, working to protect and enhance the economic interests and quality of life for family farmers, ranchers, and our rural communities. Learn more about our mission of education, cooperation, and legislative advocacy at kansasfarmersunion.org.